C.W. Johnson Jr. here, folks. Not my typical video, but one that I hope will promote peace and understanding. In the recent anti-Confederate monument hysteria that has been sweeping the nation, in which millions of dollars, which could actually be used to help minorities by investing in roads and schools, are being wasted on removing historical landmarks which aren't harming anyone, it has become a talking point of the Take 'em Down movement and other social justice warriors that these Confederate monuments were put in place to intimidate African Americans and to remind them of their place during the Jim Crow era, or were a response to the Civil Rights Movement, and therefore all African Americans are offended by them and they cause them pain. So what do they do about these guys? Besides the fact that that talking point of the Take 'em Down movement basically stereotypes African Americans and insults their intelligence and emotional stability, and is kind of racist. I could do a whole video about how social justice warriors are kind of racist. There is no historical evidence to back up the claim that Confederate monuments and statues are part of some vast conspiracy to intimidate African Americans. Now, perhaps you've seen this chart floating around the internet that shows the timeline of the dedication of Confederate monuments in the naming of schools and other sites after Southern heroes, coinciding with certain key events in African American history, such as the founding of the NAACP and the Civil Rights Movement. And the claim is that these monuments are a response to these activities upon the parts of African Americans. Besides the fact that this chart contains a logical fallacy, and excuse me while I beat a dead language here, post hoc ergo propter hoc. After this, therefore because of this, are cum hoc ergo propter hoc, with this, therefore because of this, which is a false correlation. It's basically saying that if I wash my car and it rains later in the day, then it rained because I washed my car. Now, besides the fact that this chart contains a logical fallacy, there is no other evidence to back it up. There are no dedication speeches saying that these monuments were put in place as a response to civil rights activities on the parts of African Americans, or anything on the monuments themselves saying, hey, you bleepity bleeps, stay in your place. The chart also ignores the fact that many Union statues were going up at the same time, as well as monuments to other historical figures throughout American history, and that many northern factories actually helped produce the statues, and some were even designed by northerners and Canadians. The most damning evidence against this chart is the fact that it shows a lot of the monuments going up around the years 1960 and 1910, which with simple calculation, anyone can figure out that those are the 100th and 50th anniversaries of the war, and anyone with familiarity with American culture knows that we like to celebrate big on big anniversaries like the 50th and 100th anniversaries of events. And if you ever get on Twitter and debate with a lot of the Twitter historians, they'll say that because these statues were built 50 years after an event, therefore they have nothing to do with the event, which is ridiculous considering the fact that a lot of statues are built 50 years after an event. Take, for instance, the World War II monument up in Washington, D.C. Now, critics of Confederate statues are like, that statue in New Orleans is at a place where no battle with Robert E. Lee took place. Well, no battles in World War II took place up in Washington, D.C., and yet we have a World War II monument there that was put in place 60 years after World War II for varying reasons, such as money, which is why a lot of his Confederate monuments did not go up until 50 years after the war. So this argument using the timeline of Confederate monuments being erected, removing their connection with the war and making them connected with Jim Crow, is basically saying that the World War II monument up in Washington, D.C. was erected to intimidate Muslims during the War on Terror by saying, hey, we crushed Germany and Japan, we can crush you too. Now, some critics of Confederate statues claim that the groups that put them up had connections to the Ku Klux Klan, such as the United Daughters of the Confederacy. They'll point out that one of the presidents of the UDC in 1913 published a book praising the Klan of the Reconstruction era, which was different than the Klan of the early 20th century, which was actually prevalent throughout the entire United States. The governor of Indiana, for example, was a member of the Klan and was actually out to intimidate not just Black Americans, but also immigrants, Italian Americans, Catholic Americans, Jewish Americans, anyone who was an Anglo-Saxon. Now, considering that everyone in that period was a white supremacist by today's standards, it would not be surprising if the groups responsible for the monuments had connections to the Klan, but saying that therefore they are monuments to the Klan put up to intimidate Black Americans is guilt by association, which is another logical fallacy. Now, the biggest evidence that I have seen that these statues are not part of some grand, vast conspiracy to intimidate African Americans is the fact that Booker T. Washington, the president of the Tuskegee Institute, a man who dedicated his life to advancing the status of African Americans and elevating them in mind and body to the point that he was called the Black Moses, thought Confederate statues were a good idea and even offered to help raise funds for one. Now, this is not the fallacy of appeal to authority, but it does cast doubt on the claim that these Confederate statues are a part of a conspiracy to suppress African Americans. So without further ado, here is Booker T. Washington on Confederate statues. My dear Madam, replying further to yours of June 6, I would state that I am going to take up very carefully the matter of the Confederate monument about which you have written me, and see if I can find someone to give the money that is still needed. I am very much interested in the matter, and thank you for writing me. During the summer months, people and money are very much away from home, and it is hard to reach them. So it may be I may not be able to do anything about it until fall. I want to say again how very much we all appreciate the visit of General Harrison to Tuskegee. We all realize more and more that men like him are the true friends of our race, and that any monument that will keep the fine character of such heroes before the public will prove helpful to both races in the South. Yours truly, Booker T. Washington. Note, General Harrison is George Paul Harrison, Jr., who was a Confederate officer who served during the War between the States outside Charleston, South Carolina, and after the war became a politician. This is C.W. Johnson, Jr. I hope this video has helped create peace and understanding. Please like, subscribe, and share with all your friends.